All right, let's take another look at Bevy, a more in-depth look. In the last video, we just made this basic application that kind of prints hello and stuff, does some updates, yeah, stuff like that. So Bevy is based on this ECS thing, which I didn't understand until recently. Is you split your application up into three parts: entities, components, and systems. I thought it was like one thing for a long time, but it's three separate things. And then a component is basically like a flag, potentially with some data. So you can see we have a couple of components there on the top, for example, person. So you can give that component to an entity, and that will kind of mark that entity as being a person. You can also have components with data. So for example, here is name, the name component, which has a string associated with, and it's also a nickname component, and you can have multiple things or whatever. So that's components, and an entity is basically just a collection of components. So for example, here we spawn an entity. So this thing just spawns entities, and it has three components. Like the entity is just the collection of these three components. And then you have systems, and systems, for example, greet people, that will operate on some subset of the entities and do some kind of operation. Okay, so yeah, this application, if we try to run it, let's see what happens. Okay. So actually not sure what happened. We are in the right folder. So hello plugin. So that's the problem. The hello plugin, we actually try to set the runner, but we shouldn't do that. To get something more interesting, let's do it like this. So use the default runner. So you can also change like how the app is run. But in the default plugin, it's kind of doing this very normal event loop thing. Okay, so for some reason that crashed my recording, so I'm just gonna try it again. Here we go. Run. And okay, so we get this screen, which doesn't really do anything right now, but you can see it's like periodically printing this stuff. So that's basically all that we were doing last time. But what I want to do now is we also made some notes, like draw a rectangle on the screen, UI. So I think today we'll just look at like drawing a rectangle, controlling it, and maybe trying to interact with some other rectangles. So I want to get rid of all of this. Greet people, update people. Okay, so we just have the default plugins. And we're going to be using these examples as a reference. But basically, we need to let's add a system. Add systems. We're gonna add a system at startup, and that startup system will just call setup. So it's gonna take some commands. I think we have to take the commands, and then we will say like commands dot spawn, and in here we'll spawn something. Turn off Copilot, because we're trying to learn. In here we'll spawn something, and it will be like it will at the very least have like some kind of graphics thing. So let's call it graphics thing here, and then maybe we will call one of them like the player, and then we'll spawn another one which will say is an enemy. And those like enemy and player, those will just be like markers. So it'll be kind of like an empty struct like this that that we can use to tell the types apart. So now we need to figure out how to actually make a rectangle. So they do have a lot of examples, and there's some yeah, here we go, 2D examples. So 2D shapes sounds good. And here they have some imports, we don't really care about them. They use a default plugin and a wireframe plugin. We'll just ignore the wireframe. Then they have a setup, and then they have some kind of update system. We'll also like build our own, I think. So there should be something with like control or let's search for keyboard input. So we should be able to use this to control the things. Okay, so they have a setup function, and it uses some resources, basically global variables, and then it spawns a camera bundle. That's kind of interesting. So I guess we need that to actually have something rendering. So camera bundle, camera 2D bundle, and we can just use the default. Let's try that. And what is next? So they set up these 2D meshes, and they actually just add them directly into the mesh like that. There's this global thing, and then they spawn down here, they loop, and they spawn a material mesh 2D bundle. So let's do something like that. Okay, so beyond this we need the meshes, and that was a mutable resource of meshes. Think of like it was like that. And we need the materials, which also has to be mutable, and probably it was material. No, it was color material. Okay, so now we have this graphics thing. So let's, and this is iterating over the shapes. So what we can do is we need this thing. The graphics part has to be a material. Is that something we need to import? Yeah, we need to import this stuff. So let's do that. Don't need the prelude here. And this one we don't need. Like that. Okay, so now we have some material stuff. So material to, let's start from here. Material mesh 2D bundle. And we'll try to look into what that actually is in a little bit. But let's just first get something running. So it has a mesh, so we need to construct some shape. We don't have that yet. Then we need a material. So that is just, we have to add it to the global materials, and it just says add, and then we construct a color like this. So maybe we have 150, 180, 108, like that. And then we need a transform to tell us where we are. So transform from XYZ. And this can just be like -100, 0, 0. And the rest is default, like that. Okay, so we need the shape. And what is the shape? So the shape comes from up here. We're iterating over some stuff, and that is these shapes, and that's we need to make a mesh to the handle like this. So I'm gonna actually just copy this like that. So we have a mesh to the handle, and this one has to be float as well. So that was the player, and then we can add the enemy. But the enemy is going to be red and at a slightly different location. So actually, let's format it. Let's try to figure out how big the kind of screen is. And we don't really know that. Maybe it's the camera that defines it. So it has a camera, it has a render graph, projection, global transform, tone mapping. Okay, so we're getting the default, right? We're going in here, we're saying the default, which is this one. So it sets up some projection. What does the projection have? Just randomly looking, I'm not really sure. Okay, so I think this is kind of correct. So viewpoint origin, great, and the area that the projection covers relative to viewpoint origin. So this is kind of what decides it. I don't know what it is. Can we do this? So default is 0.5, and the area is like, yeah. So it's kind of like going from -1 to 1 in either direction is what I'm getting here. So that's good to know. So maybe like 100 is way too much. What do they use here? They use extent divided by 2 plus I times extent, basically. And extent is 900. So they use a lot. So maybe these coordinates that you give here are like not from the projection, but actually from the screen size. Maybe that's in here, the default plugin. So what does this have? It has a panic handler, log task pool, type registration, frame kind, time plugin, transform plugin, window plugin default. Probably it's that one. So primary window is a window, and it's resizable. That's very nice. And aim, position, resolution. Maybe it's resolution. IME position, resizable, enable balance, focus. Right, so I don't actually know. Let's check out the resolution. So maybe these are like the size, but so it's like on the order of 1,000. So probably 100 is okay. And we're adding these rectangles, and they have a width of 50 and a height of 50. Let's make them square. And I think that's pretty good. Okay, and this one had to be an enemy. So now we are able to spawn some things, and we can try to run it. So of course there's the build, and it takes a little bit of time. Okay, so we have a couple of things. We have a player, it's kind of greenish, and we have an enemy which is red. So that's very nice. Let's exit out, and I actually do want to change things a little bit. Let's make them fully saturated. It's not that important, but there it is. Okay, now let's try to add some keyboard input. So we had this one. So what you do is you add a system, keyboard input system, and it takes this keyboard input resource, and then you check things on it. So let's add a system, and this one will say quit command. So we have quit command, and it takes a keyboard, which is a resource, and button input and key code. And then we can say if keyboard.pressed, and there's like a bunch of variations like there is in Raylib. That's probably, is it like being held down, or was it like pressed in the last frame, or things like that. So let's use just pressed. And how do we do that? We do key code and then something. So key code, key Q. So if that is pressed, I want to exit. And how do we do that? So Bevy exit from system. So how to exit from Bevy through a system. So, and there's also some kind of cookbook here that could be interesting. But basically, we have to give it this, I think, as a resource in the argument, and then we can send an exit event. Let's see if we can get this to work. So we put this in here. Now we have some exit events, and we can send Bevy app. What was it? Bevy app exit, and this is an enum. So we can send success or we can send error. So let's send success. That seems to compile. Let's run it. And compile. Pretty slow compile time. Not great, but I read that there was some kind of what's it called? Hot reloading. So it's actually kind of broken again, but I think you see it, and then we can quit it by doing this. But I need to restart my screen recording again. To be right back. Okay, something went wrong with my screen recording. It was kind of frozen and I didn't really notice. But what I did now was I added a move player system. So it takes in a query where you ask for the transform, you want to change it, and you only want to change it for the player. Then we ask for the keyboard, and we ask for the time, so we can like loop over all the players, whatever. And then if the W key is pressed, we kind of move up. We add some stuff to the Y. And now you can see we can move it up. We cannot do anything else, but we can move it up. And then we basically just repeat this a couple of times. So for example, if it's S, we want to remove some stuff. If it's A, we want to do it for X and remove. And if it's D, then it's also X. So that should be that. Now we can just move our little player thingy. So here we go, we can move. And when we get to the other one, nothing happens. They just intersect and they do this kind of clipping because the rendering is asynchronous, I guess. So let's change this to speed like it wants. So what do we need to do now? Maybe we want to add some kind of collision system. So you probably don't want to do this yourself, but let's just try for fun. So we basically want to say collision. We need something to query on. What do we want to query on? So basically we need, for this one, we can just like get the player. And the player has to check if he has, let's actually not call it enemy. Let's just call it a wall for now. Right, so the player has to check if he's hit a wall, so we need to see where the walls are, like this, and we don't need that. So we start with player position in mutable query. Actually, we need more than this, right? We also need the shape. We need to know the shape, but for now we'll just have it hard coded, I think. So 50, let's change that to size, like that. So we just have a hard coded and player query, and then we need to check all the walls. So for wall position in, maybe we need another one of those. So let's say player vector, that would be the position, and then we actually need the translation, and the wall vector would be the wall position, which is not really position, it's the transform, but whatever. So we have these. Now we have to check if they are overlapping. So it's a little bit difficult with rectangles actually. Let's say distance squared, that's going to be this one, and maybe it has a distance. It does have a distance function. Very nice. So we'll have the distance squared with the wall vector like this. And if the distance squared is greater than size, so actually it should be 2 times size. And then because this distance is squared, we also have to square this one. Maybe I don't want to, yeah, whatever. Okay, so we do it like this. So if this is the case, we need to do something to the collision, right? We have to kind of move the player back. We have to move the player back. So which way do we need to move the player? Well, let's make a delta vector, which will point from the wall to the player. So we need like subtract. Maybe I can just do minus. So like this. And that has to be, we have to normalize it, I think, like that. And then we can even say while. Is that crazy? Let's say if then we have to say player vector equals delta vector. Let's try this for now. And this, I guess this has to be like mutable reference into that thing. Do this, do a copy, and like that, and like that. Okay. So let's try to run that and see what happens. And it didn't like that. So transform in a way that conflicts with the previous system. Consider using without. So we did something wrong in our query here. Transform with player with wall. These should be disjoint. I don't understand why it is complaining about that. Maybe let's try to not add it. Let's see if that works. Okay, so that still works. which means it has some kind of problem with this query, with player, with wall. It suggests that we do without, so let's try that. So with player but without wall, and the same here, with wall but without player. Try to run that. Okay, so that works, but it's like constantly moving away without me doing anything. So it means there's a problem here. So we have the translation, the other translation, we have the distance squared, compute the distance squared between 2 points in space. That seems correct. How about, no, let's not do it like that. So compute the distance squared between 2 points. And if that is greater than 2 times size, and size is 50, to the squared, then we do this, and maybe this is wrong. What if we say translation like that? This one we can just do that. So it's still being pushed away without me doing anything. So it's probably a very silly mistake. But let's, in that case, let's go back to where it was before. That makes a little bit more sense. And distance squared. So it's always greater than this, which is very strange. It shouldn't change anything, but what if we do this instead? And then it should be length squared. Yeah, still moving away. So it's guaranteed to be some kind of silly thing that I just cannot spot right now. What if we just try to print this thing, distance squared? And let's see what happens. So the distance squared just goes up like crazy. We have 50. And what is 50 squared? So for some reason, this comparison is not working. So what is this type? 32. Distance squared. It's because if it's oh my god. Okay, so yeah, I was right. It was some kind of stupid mistake. Okay, finally. So now if we get too close, so it's already now it's colliding. I cannot get closer than this. So that is obviously a little bit of a bug. And it's because if I had to guess, the size is the full width and the translation point is like in the middle. So if we do this, the translation point is in the middle of the rectangle. So if we do this, it should work better. So I can get close, and I cannot get closer than this. So it doesn't work here on the corners. It only works if we come like straight on an edge, because we didn't really bother to do rectangle collision. It's basically circle collision, but there we have like a basic collision system. Okay, I think the final thing I want to do is to change how the wall looks when you are close. So that's another system. We can say update, and it's going to be the highlight system. Highlight wall, let's call it like that. It's basically the same query, I think, except we do want to change something on the wall. We want to transform, and then we want to change something. What do we want to change? Basically, we want to change the material. Let's try to change the material. So what is this? This is a handle. Great. So we don't really know what this is. It's a handle of M, and M is a material 2D. And this is like a color thing, which maybe is a material 2D. So maybe we just do like, want to change the handle of color and some issue unclosed delimiter. It's this loop. That's the issue. Right, so that didn't work. It's not an asset. Right, so materials, and that returns a handle of A. How do we do this? So M is here, material 2D. Okay, let me Google it. Okay, so in this example, he's getting a reference to a sprite. So we don't really have that, but we have this material. So instead of this, we have a material mesh 2D bundle of M. So it also contains the transform. So maybe it's like you can do material mesh 2D bundle of something. And it's not going to be color. We already know that. Is it called highlight? It should be called highlight wall. Okay, so that doesn't really work for me. What is sprite bundle? Can we get the sprite bundle? So this one is not generic. What is this actually that we're adding? It's not going to tell us. So implement into something, so we can, this should implement into, of course we cannot find it here. Maybe it's for color. Because it's not like that. It's let's just search for into. Okay, didn't work either. Okay, be right back. Okay, here we go. So what we have is a material mesh 2D bundle of a color material. Maybe it makes sense when you think about it. So then you need to loop over this one. And what is the complaint? It's not a component. Okay, so maybe it has to be this handle after all. And then we also want to transform like that. Okay, great. So we have the position of player. Let's just do like that. Then we have the wall. Let's do like wall, and let's here we'll call it transform. Maybe just T to look at. And then this has to be mutable. Actually, the player doesn't have to be mutable in this one. So we can remove this, remove that, mutable. And here we have like the mutable handle with the material. And then we basically need to do this again. So this could be factored out, but we'll do PT translation and the distance to the wall translation or wall transform translation. And if that distance squared is less than, now we remember it's actually less than power, integer power, then we want to do handle dot something dot. There's many things on this thing. Maybe we can just do color dot something. There's no color on that, so handle, I kind of think it's just like a pointer. I want to think of it like a pointer. So this thing does have a color. So we should be able to say, so it's probably not like a pointer. Great. So ID path is weak, is strong, clone weak, untyped. Great. So what do they say here on Reddit? They say we'll return a handle, which is basically an ID, which you can use to fetch the material back from your assets. Okay, so that's kind of what we need to do. So this one doesn't have to be mutable after all, but we do need mutable assets, which is like a mutable resource of assets. So it should be the same as this one. Why don't we just copy that? Do it like this. And doesn't have to be mutable, doesn't have to be mutable. But now we can get the ID. Get the ID. Okay, so call it asset ID. It's this thing. We'll say materials.get get mutable of the asset ID, and this should be maybe if let some let's call material equals to this, we will do an action, and the material is now what? It's a color material. Great. And what can we do to that color? It has the color, and we can set that to a new color. Maybe. So let's get this thing. So this is the original color, and this is going to be the new color. So it'll be like this color. Okay, let's try to run it. And it didn't work because I had this kind of thing. Okay, try again. So now if I get close, it changes color to this purple thing. But you can see it doesn't change back. So we could also add that inside of the highlight system. And I think basically it's a little bit weird that we are kind of creating a new color. I don't like that so much. So maybe we just like set hue to 300. So we're not creating a new thing all the time. And here we'll have like, we will do this and we'll say else the hue can be set to 0 like before. And that should be it. No, this if else, and there we go. This should be it. So what we're doing now, we're checking the distance for all walls, and we're saying, let's get the ID of this thing. And if we successfully get the asset, then we do this check. That changes the color. So now we should have a basic highlight system. And that's kind of the power of this ECS, that different kind of logical things you have, and it's not working very well because it's like conflicting with the collision system. Okay, but this is the power of ECS, that we can just make a simple function that is like one little part of the logic that the game or whatever needs to have. So let's add a bit of a margin there. And then we can just think about that, we can implement that, and hopefully the runtime is efficient so we can have a lot of these systems. So now when you come close, it gets a different color, and when you're far away, it has the original color. It doesn't look very good on my screen, but that's for another time. So how about we now try to add like a bunch of walls, like 10 walls. 10 walls. And we want to add them, maybe that's fine, but the Y can be like, let's start at -200, let's say I as F32, and let's space them out with a distance of 75. So let's see how that looks. For some reason, it looks like this. What happened? So should be spawning a bunch of these things, and isn't that how they do it over here? In the example, they loop and they spawn, and I don't see big issue with that. Maybe let's try starting. It's now I see the problem. It's because I had this needs to be plus. Okay, let's try again. So now we have a bunch of walls, and we can go in and we can highlight them. And maybe let's add one final system. I said that highlight system was the last thing, but let's add a system here that will say destroy wall. So the destroy wall needs to kind of remove an entity. So let me Google how to do that. Okay, so this cookbook here says you can use commands to spawn, despawn entities. So why don't we try that? We'll have destroy wall. And we need the player. We need to know where the player is, where the wall is. We don't really need to do anything with the color right now. We do need a keyboard, and we do also need the commands. So we'll get those up here. And we will kind of do the same loop again. And so we do this check a lot. So that should be factored out. But basically, let's add a couple more of those. So like this. And this one doesn't have a handle, so we need this one. Right. So if we are close, and if keyboard just pressed, saw that one earlier. Let's say key code key space. Okay, is that a thing? Space. So if the space bar is pressed, then we want to destroy it. So I think we have to say commands despawn. Spawn was a thing, right? So despawn is not a thing. So how do we despawn? We have to say entity. And that means we also have to query the entity. So for this one, and that's not mutable. So here we can say, give me also the entity. And then we'll say entity. And actually in the wall now we have to say wall entity. So the entity of the wall entity, despawn that. So let's see if that works. So we can go close now, and like whenever it's highlighted, ideally that's when. So actually we do have kind of an issue, which is that it should match the highlighting. So let's add this kind of margin, because otherwise it's too confusing, like when is it going to work. But now we know it's going to work when the wall is highlighted, or it should work. I don't know if it's going to work, but we know it should work. So we can go in and we can say space, and we destroy it, and we can go pass through. So this is basically the start of like a mining game or something like that. Of course, you have to add something where it doesn't like destroy it instantly and whatever, but yeah, there we go. So I think that's enough, Bevy, for now, and I will see you in the next one. Bye bye.